I'm sure you've seen these people sometimes. If you're driving down the street or something, maybe you'll notice somebody who's like standing on the corner and they're kind of talking to themselves. Have you ever seen somebody? Maybe it's, and not to pick on these folks, but sometimes I've seen like homeless people where they'll be like by themselves and they're just arguing. Yeah, sometimes even yelling, screaming really loudly, and they're having this conversation, having this conflict even. Sometimes I've heard them cussing and screaming and yelling and yet using profanity and like they're in a real argument with somebody, but they're talking to themselves, right? Like there's nobody there. It's obviously obvious that those folks are dealing with some form of mental illness, and you've probably seen that before. I've seen it a lot, but I mention that for a reason because I actually think it's not just limited to those folks. I think actually I see that on a daily basis every time I go on social media. I see that level of mental illness, and that's not meant to. I'm not talking about hyperbole here. I'm not talking about, I'm not exaggerating. Literally, and I've been guilty of this myself. A lot of us have been engaging in just severely dysfunctional thinking when it comes to opposition energy, and that's what I want to talk to you about for the next couple of minutes here. Opposition energy. It leads to dysfunction and disease, even mental illness. And I believe it's actually a manifestation of mental illness is opposition energy. And here's what I'm talking about. Okay. I want you to think about this. This is more of a put on your science hats a little bit. Okay. A lot of talk about science these days. Let's put on our science hats for just a minute. Okay. So a lot of times we think of things in opposites like hot and cold, right? And so we think of the opposite of hot is cold. So cold is something that is opposed to hot, and hot is something that's opposed to cold. It's kind of how we've been, kind of conditioned to think of the world. Everything has its opposites, okay? And these things are in tension with each other. They oppose each other, right? Yeah, that's an illusion. So here's the deal. Think about water. So there's hot water and there's cold water. We tend to think, even on a faucet, we have two sides. We have, on your right side is hot and on the left is cold, right? So you kind of see that. But in reality, what is cold? What is cold? It's actually nothing. Cold water is not a thing, right? So we only have hot water. So there's water that has heat added to it. So when you add heat to water, obviously the molecules are going to vibrate at a fast rate of speed and it's going to give off heat. But heat is an energy. It's a form of energy that water may have. So there's hot that can be added to the water, but there's no real such thing as cold water. Because to get cold water, you don't have to do anything. So all cold water is just an absence of heat. So when you take heat out of the water, it becomes extremely cold by default because it's the absence of heat. There is no such thing as cold. There is no substance of cold. Heat is actually something. Heat is actually a form of energy. Cold is not. It's nothing. So when we say that, we tend to think of cold as the opposite of hot, but it's actually not true. There really is no opposite. It's just heat or non-heat. You either have heat or you don't. But cold is nothing, okay? It's the same thing with light and darkness. We tend to think of light and darkness, and these are two opposing things that oppose each other. And, one is, trying to eradicate the other, but that's actually just false. So what is light? At its core, light is really made up of photons. Okay, that's what light is. It's made up of photons. Photons are a substance. It's something. That's what light is. Do you know what darkness is? Nothing. It's not a substance. Literally, it's nothing. So when you think about darkness, we tend to think of darkness as creeping in. Darkness is encroaching. We're afraid of the dark. Yeah, it's nothing. It's not actually a substance. It's all darkness is it's an inability to perceive light. So whenever we don't perceive light, something looks dark. But it's literally the absence of an awareness of light. Darkness is not a thing. It doesn't exist. There's no substance to it. There's light and there's non-light, or the ability or the lack of an ability to see light. That's all there is. There is no darkness. There's just light and the inability to see light. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yeah. Okay, translate this to our everyday life, okay? It's the same thing that's true with abundance and poverty, right? Abundance is, right? Abundance is the nature of the universe. Poverty is it's kind of like darkness. It's a lack of perception of abundance. That's what poverty is. It's a mindset, right? It's nothing. Doesn't exist. Poverty is, by its very definition, is something that doesn't exist. It's like darkness. It's nothing. But we tend to think of it as something. Poverty is something. Darkness is something. Cold is something. No, these are things that are just voids. If something is nothing, it can't be something. It's nothing. Now, light is something, right? Heat is something. It's energy. Abundance is something. It is essence. Life, consciousness is something. Death, what is death? It's nothing. It's a perception of non-life. But death is not a thing. When we say death, we tend to think of, what we're really saying is, I don't perceive life, the absence of life. But death is not a thing. Death is not a life. Otherwise, that's why it's death. Death is a void of some sorts. Okay? It's a perception. It's not a thing that's creeping and coming after you. Exactly. So we have life. Life is substance. Death is nothing. We have light. Light is substance. Darkness is nothing. We have heat. Heat is something. Cold is nothing. You see where I'm going with this? Yeah. Abundance is something. Poverty is nothing. But we have been conditioned in a world to be opposed to something that doesn't exist. How many of us in our everyday life are opposed to something? If you're opposed to something, you're actually opposed to something that doesn't even exist. It's nothing. You are opposed to something that is nothing. It's a perception that nothing is real. This is mental illness, people. And it's opposition energy. It's why we fall into these dualistic camps that put things so we operate in this opposition energy. We're opposed to the thing that we're afraid of, but the thing we're afraid of is actually nothing. Does this make sense? We see this manifested most acutely during election season. And we're moving into election season. And we're opposed to something. Let me just give you some good news. Can I do that? Can I give you some good news? Here's what you have to be concerned with. All you have to be concerned with is this: light, life. Don't worry about death. Life, light, abundance. Things that are actually in existence. Focus on that. You can create your world from that. You don't have to be opposed to anything. If you'd like more information about this, go to my website, jamaljavanji.com. Scroll to the bottom, put your email address in there, click submit, you'll get on my mailing list. Or I would love to invite you to a free Facebook group I have called Uprooting from the Poverty Mindset Facebook group. You can just do a search for that on Facebook. You can request to join. You have to answer like 3 questions. And I do periodic, on a semi-weekly basis, I'll do live presentations about the poverty mindset that has afflicted a lot of people. And I'd love for you to be part of those conversations. So you can request to join that group. Okay? All right. Thank you, guys.